How could you do this? It had to burn.
The smell reached me before the sound did. That acrid, chemical smell of synthetic fabric burning, drifting up through the vents of our house 3 days before my wedding. I found Peyton standing in the backyard, my wedding dress in a metal trash can in front of her, flames already curling up past the bodice toward the sleeves I'd had hand-embroidered with small pearl details my own mother had helped me choose. She didn't run. She didn't even look particularly startled when I came through the back door. She just stood there, arms crossed, watching my dress burn with an expression I can only describe as satisfied. "Peyton," I said, my voice barely functioning. "What did you do?" "I did us both a favor," she said. "You were never going to actually replace my mom, and I got tired of everyone pretending you might. I want you to sit with that sentence the way I had to sit with it, standing in my own backyard 3 days before my wedding, watching $6,000 and 4 months of careful planning collapse into ash in front of a 20-year-old who felt nothing but relief doing it. My name is Vanessa Coleman, and I'd spent 3 years building a genuine relationship with Peyton, patient and careful, never once trying to replace the mother she'd lost when she was 12 years old. I understood, standing there, that patience had apparently meant nothing at all. Before I tell you what happened next, because the way my fiancé Gregory responded to what his own daughter had just done ended up testing our entire relationship considerably more than the dress itself ever could. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because what unfolded over the following weeks changed this family permanently. Gregory came running out moments later, drawn by the smoke detector, and I watched him take in the scene. His daughter, arms crossed, unrepentant, standing beside the smoking remains of my wedding dress. "Peyton, what is wrong with you?" he said, and for one brief moment, I felt something like relief, believing he understood exactly how serious this actually was. Then he turned to me, and the very first thing out of his mouth wasn't an apology. It was an excuse. "She's been under a lot of stress," he said. "I think we need to give her some grace here." I had no idea, standing in that backyard with the smell of burnt fabric still thick in the air, exactly how much that single sentence was about to reveal about the man I was 3 days away from marrying, or exactly how much my own family was about to have to step in to force a reckoning neither Gregory nor Peyton seemed willing to face on their own. I want to take you back to the beginning, because understanding exactly how much effort I'd put into this relationship over 3 years matters enormously to understanding how completely that backyard moment gutted me. I met Gregory in Charlotte, North Carolina, at a mutual friend's dinner party, 2 years after his wife, Danielle, had died of ovarian cancer. Peyton was 17 at the time, a junior in high school, still raw from a loss I couldn't fully imagine. Losing your mother during the exact years you need her most. I want to be honest about something most stories like this tend to skip past. I didn't rush into anything with Gregory, and I certainly didn't rush anything with Peyton. Gregory and I dated quietly for almost a year before he introduced me to her formally, at his insistence, wanting to make sure our relationship was serious before adding that particular complexity to his daughter's already difficult life. The early years showing genuine effort. That first meeting with Peyton was tense but not hostile, a careful, guarded politeness that I understood, completely, given everything she'd lost. I made a decision early on that I've never once regretted, regardless of how that backyard moment eventually unfolded. I told her directly that I had no intention of trying to replace her mother, that I understood Danielle would always hold a place in this family that belonged entirely to her, and that I simply hoped, over time, we might build something separate and real between the two of us. I want to walk you through some of the specific ways I tried to honor that promise over the following 3 years, because I think it matters to understanding exactly how blindsided I was by what happened. I never once redecorated Danielle's old sewing room, which Gregory had converted into a small memorial space filled with her photographs and belongings, even though it sat directly across from what eventually became our bedroom. I made a point, every year on Danielle's birthday, of quietly making myself scarce, giving Gregory and Peyton space to grieve together without my presence complicating it. I attended Peyton's high school graduation from the back row, deliberately, so the seats closest to the stage would remain for Danielle's side of the family. I helped her move into her college dorm 2 years later, carrying boxes alongside Gregory, careful never to overstep into a role I understood wasn't mine to claim. I want to be honest that Peyton's warmth toward me, over those 3 years, never fully arrived, despite everything I tried. She was polite, mostly, in the specific, careful way people are polite to someone they haven't decided whether to trust. I told myself, repeatedly, that this was simply the pace grief required, that some relationships take considerably longer than 3 years to fully settle into something warm. Looking back now, I can identify specific moments I dismissed too easily at the time. Peyton would occasionally make small, pointed comments, mentioning, at family dinners, some specific memory of her mother that felt less like genuine reminiscence, and more like a deliberate reminder of exactly who I wasn't. She never once called me anything beyond my first name, which felt entirely reasonable to me, though I noticed, eventually, that she seemed to actively avoid even that, often restructuring sentences awkwardly just to avoid addressing me directly at all. I confronted Gregory about this pattern once, gently, about 18 months into our relationship. "I think Peyton's still working through a lot," he said, the same conflict-averse explanation I would hear, in various forms, many more times over the following years. "I don't want to push her before she's ready." I accepted that explanation for considerably longer than I probably should have, trusting that Gregory, as her father, understood his own daughter's timeline better than I possibly could. Gregory proposed just over 3 years into our relationship, in a small, quiet moment at home rather than some elaborate public gesture. Exactly the kind of proposal that felt right for the specific, careful life we'd built together. I called Peyton myself, the following day, wanting her to hear the news directly from me rather than secondhand. Her reaction over the phone was brief and considerably colder than I'd hoped for. "Congratulations," she said, in a tone that made the word feel almost accusatory. "I guess Dad's finally ready to move on completely." I want you to notice that phrase, because it mattered enormously to everything that followed. Move on completely. Not simply remarry. Completely move on, as though my presence in Gregory's life required some final, total erasure of Danielle's place in it. A belief I'd spent 3 years actively working to disprove, apparently without ever fully reaching her. I had no idea, hanging up that phone call, exactly how much unaddressed resentment was still sitting underneath Peyton's careful politeness, or exactly how completely it was about to detonate, 3 days before my wedding, in a backyard trash can. I want to walk you through the 4 months of wedding planning leading up to that afternoon, because I think several specific moments, viewed now with full hindsight, should have warned me considerably more clearly than I let them at the time. Peyton agreed to be part of the wedding party, somewhat reluctantly, when Gregory asked her directly rather than leaving the invitation to me. I remember feeling genuinely hopeful about that decision, believing it might signal some final softening after 3 years of careful distance. I want to be honest about the specific tension that emerged almost immediately once actual planning began. Peyton canceled 2 separate dress-fitting appointments for the bridesmaids, citing scheduling conflicts that felt, even at the time, somewhat manufactured. She arrived late to the engagement dinner I'd organized specifically to bring both families together, offering a thin, unconvincing explanation about traffic that didn't quite match the timeline of her actual drive. I mentioned these small frictions to Gregory more than once during those months. "She's just busy with her senior year," he said each time, the same reflexive defense I'd grown accustomed to over 3 years, though I noticed, looking back now, that his explanations had started requiring considerably more effort to sound convincing even to himself. 6 weeks before the wedding, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Peyton on the phone with a college friend, her voice carrying clearly through a cracked door while I searched for a serving tray in the hallway closet. "I don't know why everyone expects me to just be happy about this," she said. "It's like my mom gets erased a little more every single day, and everyone acts like I'm supposed to just smile through it." I want to be honest about what I felt overhearing that, standing frozen in that hallway. Genuine sympathy first, understanding the specific weight of grief she was still visibly carrying. But underneath that sympathy, something else too, a quiet, growing unease that 3 years of my own careful effort hadn't actually reached whatever this specific resentment was rooted in. I told Gregory about the conversation that same evening. I want you to understand exactly how he responded, because it mattered enormously to everything that came after. She's allowed to have complicated feelings about this, he said. I don't think we need to make a whole thing out of one private phone call. The final week passed in the specific, exhausting blur most brides describe. Final dress fitting, seating charts, rehearsal dinner logistics. I picked up my wedding dress from the boutique 4 days before the wedding, hand-carrying it home myself rather than trusting delivery, hanging it carefully in the guest room closet where it would stay until the morning of the ceremony. I want to walk you through the specific detail that still haunts me, looking back. Peyton visited our house twice during that final week, ostensibly to help with wedding preparations, spending considerable time alone in the guest room organizing gift bags for out-of-town guests. The same room where my dress hung, unguarded, in its garment bag. I had no idea, thanking her for her help both times, exactly what she was actually doing during those unsupervised hours in that room, or exactly how much quiet, deliberate planning had gone into what she eventually did, 3 days before I was supposed to wear that dress down the aisle. You already witnessed the initial moments in that backyard. The burning dress, Peyton's unrepentant expression, Gregory's immediate instinct to make excuses rather than hold his daughter accountable. I want to walk you through what happened over the following 48 hours, because Gregory's response during that stretch tested our relationship considerably more severely than the dress itself. I want to be honest about the specific, disorienting practicality of that first evening. My mother arriving within the hour, alongside my sister, both of them helping me process not just the emotional devastation, but the concrete logistical crisis of a wedding 3 days away with no dress to wear. We'll figure something out, my mother said, holding me while I cried in a way I hadn't cried since Gregory's proposal, the specific, disorienting whiplash of joy collapsing into devastation within the span of a single afternoon. Gregory, meanwhile, spent that first evening in a prolonged, quiet conversation with Peyton behind their closed bedroom door. A conversation I wasn't invited into, emerging nearly 2 hours later with an update that left me genuinely stunned. She's really shaken up about all of this, he told me. I think the wedding stress finally caught up with her in a bad way. I don't think we should press charges or make this into a bigger legal thing than it needs to be. I want to walk you through exactly what I felt hearing that, because I think it matters enormously to understanding the specific betrayal layered underneath the original one. Gregory, I said, your daughter destroyed $6,000 of property 3 days before our wedding, and your first instinct is protecting her from consequences rather than acknowledging what she actually did to me. I'm not saying what she did was okay, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. I'm saying I know my daughter, and I don't think turning this into some huge legal battle helps anyone heal from it. I want to be honest that this response frightened me considerably more than the burned dress itself had. I understood, in that exact conversation, that I was potentially marrying a man who would consistently choose his daughter's comfort over acknowledging genuine harm done to me. A pattern I recognized suddenly, stretching back across the entire 3 years I'd spent making excuses for Peyton's coldness on his behalf. My father, a retired police captain named Marcus Coleman, drove up from Savannah the following morning, having heard the full story from my mother the night before. I want to walk you through his specific involvement, because it became the turning point that finally forced a real reckoning neither Gregory nor Peyton seemed willing to reach on their own. This isn't about punishing a grieving young woman, my father told Gregory directly, sitting across from him at our kitchen table. This is about a pattern I'm hearing described that's been building for 3 years, one you've consistently excused rather than addressed. Vanessa deserves better than being asked to simply absorb whatever damage your daughter's unresolved grief happens to cause. I watched Gregory's composure crack slightly, hearing that, some part of him clearly recognizing the truth in it, even as another part scrambled to defend his usual instinct toward avoidance. I want to be honest about the conversation Gregory and I had later that same day, because it became, in many ways, the actual turning point of this entire story. I told him plainly that I couldn't marry a man who would continue prioritizing his daughter's avoidance of accountability over genuine harm done to the people who loved him. I need you to actually parent her through this, I said. Not punish her cruelly, but not excuse her either. I need you to have the hard conversation you've been avoiding for 3 years, The one about whether she can actually make room in her life for both her mother's memory and a genuine relationship with me. I had no idea, delivering that ultimatum, whether Gregory was actually capable of the kind of accountability I was asking for, or whether 3 years of conflict avoidance had simply calcified into something he could no longer reverse, even when everything he claimed to want was genuinely at stake. Gregory came to me 2 days later, the wedding now postponed by 3 weeks to give everyone time to actually address what had happened rather than rushing through a ceremony built on unresolved damage. He told me he'd finally had the real conversation with Peyton, the one he'd been avoiding for 3 years. I want to walk you through what Gregory told me about that conversation, because it revealed considerably more than either of us had understood about the actual roots of Peyton's resentment. He'd asked her directly why she'd waited until 3 days before the wedding to act on feelings she'd apparently been carrying for years. She told me she'd been waiting for me to notice on my own, Gregory said, his voice carrying a specific, raw honesty I hadn't heard from him in months. She said she'd been dropping hints for years, the comments at dinner, the distance, the way she avoided saying Vanessa's name directly, and I never once actually addressed any of it. I just kept telling both of you she needed time, without ever actually finding out what she needed time for. I want to be honest about the specific complexity of what Gregory finally understood, sitting with his daughter through that difficult conversation. Peyton's resentment wasn't really about me specifically, not entirely. It was about watching her father move through his own grief and eventual healing while she felt stuck, unable to find permission to do the same, compounded by 3 years of a father too conflict-averse to actually help her work through it. Peyton asked to speak with me directly 4 days after that conversation, and I want to walk you through that meeting carefully, because it became considerably more honest than I'd expected, given everything that preceded it. "I'm not going to pretend burning your dress was okay," she said, sitting across from me at a coffee shop neither of us had chosen for any particular significance beyond neutral ground. "It wasn't. I've had a lot of time to sit with how genuinely awful that was, and I understand if you can't forgive me for it. I want to be honest that I didn't offer instant, easy forgiveness in that moment, because I don't think that would have been honest to either of us. I need you to understand something," I said. "I spent 3 years deliberately trying not to take anything from you. I skipped birthdays, sat in the back row at your graduation, never touched your mother's memorial room. I need to understand why none of that mattered to you." Peyton was quiet for a long moment before answering. "It did matter," she said. "I think I was just so scared that if I let myself actually like you, it would mean I was finally okay with my mom being gone. And I wasn't ready for that. I'm not sure I'm even fully ready now. But I know burning your dress wasn't really about you. It was about me not knowing what to do with everything I was still carrying." I want to be honest that this conversation didn't resolve everything instantly, the way a tidier version of this story might suggest. What it did offer was something considerably more valuable. Genuine understanding for the first time in 3 years, of exactly what I'd actually been up against, and confirmation that Gregory finally understood his own role in letting it fester unaddressed for so long. Gregory and Peyton began attending family therapy together, twice monthly, specifically working through her unresolved grief and his own pattern of conflict avoidance. I want to be honest that I didn't attend those sessions myself, understanding that some of what needed working through belonged specifically between a father and his daughter, separate from my own presence in either of their lives. I had no idea, agreeing to reschedule our wedding rather than calling it off entirely, exactly how much stronger the eventual ceremony would feel. 3 weeks later, once it was finally built on something considerably more honest than the careful avoidance that had defined the 3 years leading up to it. We married 3 weeks later than originally planned, in a considerably smaller ceremony than we'd initially envisioned, in my parents' backyard in Savannah rather than the venue we'd originally booked. I want to be honest that this smaller version ended up meaning more to me than the elaborate original plans ever could have. Peyton attended, standing beside Gregory rather than in the bridesmaid role she'd originally agreed to, a change she requested herself, telling me honestly that she didn't feel ready to stand at the altar in celebration, but that she genuinely wanted to be present and supportive from the audience instead. I want to be honest that I respected that boundary considerably more than I would have respected a performed, premature warmth she wasn't actually ready to offer. She approached me near the end of the reception, in a moment I hadn't expected, and told me quietly, "I'm glad you didn't just let this go completely. I think I needed someone to finally hold both me and my dad accountable, and I don't think that would have happened if you just quietly absorbed what I did." It's been 8 months since that wedding, and I want to give you an honest account of where things actually stand, rather than a tidier resolution than real healing usually offers. Peyton and I speak regularly now, still building something genuine rather than performed, though I want to be honest that real warmth has grown between us in ways I hadn't necessarily expected given how the entire situation began. Gregory and I have done our own work in the months since, specifically around his instinct toward conflict avoidance, a pattern, I've come to understand, that extended considerably further than just his relationship with Peyton, showing up in smaller ways throughout our own relationship that I'd simply learned to work around rather than address directly. If you've ever poured genuine effort into a relationship that seemed to yield nothing in return, wondering whether your patience was simply being wasted on someone unwilling to meet you halfway, I want you to hear this clearly. Sometimes the resentment you're facing isn't actually about you at all, even when it's directed squarely at you. And sometimes the people who love you fail you not through cruelty, but through avoidance. Choosing comfort over the harder work of addressing real harm directly, because confrontation feels riskier than simply hoping a problem resolves itself quietly over time. Peyton burned my wedding dress out of 3 years of unaddressed grief and resentment neither she nor her father had ever properly confronted. It took real, uncomfortable accountability from both of them, insisted upon by my own family rather than offered freely by theirs, to finally turn that devastating afternoon into something that ultimately made all 3 of our relationships considerably more honest than they'd ever been before. I lost a wedding dress that day. What I gained, eventually, was a family finally willing to stop avoiding the truth.